The legacy you leave behind is a
Right.
sustainable business for the younger generation.
Yes,
And
right.
suddenly, not all of them, but a lot of them understood that, and they wanted to be part of it, which is fantastic. So mindset was the biggest challenge.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers, and in each of these episodes, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with different BPM practitioners or digital transformation professionals, different people that are putting BPM into practice day in and day out in existing, living, breathing organizations. They're encountering different challenges and hurdles and problems, and they're overcoming them, and they're using BPM as a solution to do this. And so I'm really excited for today's interview. I'm always learning a lot in these conversations, and I'm particularly excited for the conversation I'm about to have today. I'm sitting down with Vahid Pourghadiri, who is the head of business transformation at AGL Energy. Really excited for this. We had a great conversation at the end of last year, and I know that for those that are listening, you're going to learn a lot from this conversation. So please get your notepads and pens ready. I'm going to be jotting down notes, and I hope you are as well. But Vahid, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So what we might do to begin with is if you can take us back to the day when you were first introduced to the idea or the topic of BPM, and then take us on a journey leading up to what you're doing today.
Sure. So my career actually started in automotive industry in Europe. And automotive industry, a high-speed manufacturing type of company by nature, is very process orientated. And essentially, unless you get your process right, you're not going to be in the business for long. So that was my first footing in the process world and the value of a good process. But as my career journeyed into different industries, what I did come across was what I call hollow processes. Processes that gives this illusion that you are in control, but when you scratch the surface and go into the detail, you realize it is not in control.
Right.
And especially this type of industries I've been involved in, which are by nature heavy industries, which are distinctly different to, say, an industry like Target or McDonald's, where you can have fairly simple processes, and the level of education needed to operate in those industries are not advanced education. They operate well with simple processes, but the businesses I've been involved in are very complex and complex equipment and very large scale in terms of complexity. So if you have a hollow process, then you're in trouble. And if you see, especially in the decades in the 2000s and even in 2010s, so many major projects or major initiatives didn't work out as well as they could, despite all these processes and investments that these businesses or even nations invested, and they still didn't provide the ultimate result that they required.
Right.
So that's been my sort of evolution in the process world. And that kind of brought me to a place where I said, okay, so what do I need to do to change this? And that's where the notion of transformation and a business transformation came up, where we bring a different tack to process development. And the tack that I came up with was people-centric.
Yes, right.
So not process for process's sake, but for people's sake. So the individuals who have to drive that process, they have to be not only the executor of that process, but also the designer in a way of the process. So that's where the different tack I created it plays out.
Yes, that's great. And I think, people are huge when it comes to process. If you think about it on a technical level, but you're not thinking about, well, we've got to collaborate with different people when it comes to process. We're collaborating with the frontline employees, the process practitioners, the ones that are actually carrying out the work. If you're communicating to senior leadership or the executive level, you're showing that cross-functional view, how everything ties together. But when it comes to process, you're working with people, you're collaborating with people. So you need to, have the ability or the skills to bring people along for the journey, or to paint that story, to paint that picture. I think that's very important.
Yeah, and to your point, the people are the practitioners of your process. They're the ones who are going to hit the buttons to say something goes to this direction, that direction. If they don't have a sense of ownership of that,
Yes.
and feel that they're actually a player in this world, they become very detached. And when people become detached from the process and they just follow and tick the boxes, you failed.
Yes.
As an organization, you failed.
Yes, that's right. And many organizations have embarked on BPM journeys over, as you were saying, over the last 10, 20 years, where these different initiatives or projects that they've sort of crumbled, and value hasn't been delivered. They've attempted BPM in whatever context or scenario. Maybe it was because they saw their competitor starting to do something working with process, and so they copied, but they didn't have the fundamentals in place. They didn't have the key ingredients in place. Maybe that the company culture wasn't right, and I think there's an important point there about, that output versus outcome. Are you just doing work for work's sake, or are you actually looking at what value is being delivered through this work? And I think this past year has been huge for organizations to, I guess, put the finger on the pulse and actually be like, well, what is actually working, and where is value being delivered, and what can be scrapped? Because I know there are huge organizations that have, they've been able to wipe out 60, 70, 80% of their programs, because when push comes to shove, they realize they're not actually delivering value to the organization.
Spot on. And again, just you kind of touched upon it. You do it because your competitor is doing it. You shouldn't be thinking about it. You should see what you should be doing as a business to take your business to the next level. You should be ahead of your competitor, not lagging behind your competitor. And again, with the world we saw in 2020, where everyone was waiting for somebody else to actually take the step, and you see the lack of preparation in managing crisis, and unfortunately, a lot of people lost their lives as a result of that.
That's right. And I think that, that's an interesting point there about organizations being reactive versus proactive. As an organization, are you going to spend time reacting to the fires that are happening in your organization, the pain points, the problems, or are you going to be putting time, effort, and energy into being proactive, creating the future? Because as we talked about just before we started this conversation, if you're not creating the future, one of your competitors probably will, and if they create the future, you're going to be playing by their rules.
Absolutely. Because people default to the first person or in the organization in that area, and whatever scheme they've come up with, they default to that, and then they become the people who set the scene. So to the sort of notion of transformation, I actually did a conference in Newcastle last year where I talked to local industries and individuals from those local industries who all had transformation in their title. And in that conference, when I was the only speaker, when I told them, have you got people in developing your process transformation? And basically the common consensus was no. Right. I said, well, I can tell you from my experience, you will fail.
Right.
Without people at the center of your transformation or drive, your processes, doesn't matter how detailed, how well planned they are, they will fail, because people will feel totally disassociated and disconnected with that process.
Yes, that's right. So I guess for those people that are listening to this conversation, and maybe they're in an organization where BPM hasn't been adopted, it's very early days. Maybe they've been tasked to understand what is BPM all about and how do we implement it into an organization. How do you bring people to the center of it? How do you get that buy-in, that sponsorship? How do you get the process practitioners to understand that, hey, BPM's not about taking your job away and just automating everything. BPM's about bringing you in, improving things, making your day-to-day work better, and advancing the organization into the digital future.
Sure. So the best way I can answer that question is always start with why, which is Simon Sinek's thing. Start with the why, get the why really well bedded. And in our particular case, we spent nearly 12 months just on explaining the why. Right. So we went through a monumental communication campaign, bringing our workforce, which are with all intents and purposes, people who were maybe early 20th century mindset in terms of industry, and bring them into a 21st century mindset saying, so coal-fired power stations are dinosaurs.
Right.
And unless we transform our business for that future where there is no future for coal-fired power stations, or very small future for coal-fired power stations, most of our community will actually disappear. This community that's built around these huge assets, immobile assets, will have to disperse.
Right.
So we spent a lot of time in that why area, and people. It took a long time. We had workshops after workshops explaining why this was the case. So once we got the why, then the what suddenly emerged, because the individuals knew what needed to be done, because they're all intelligent. But it's getting them to first understand the why, then the what comes. So that's why I always say the why and the what was easy. Then the next step is the how. And that how bit, to work out how you take that, your why and the what, and transform it into a how, and bringing people in that journey with you, so they feel they are the ones who are having a say in the how, not just you dictating to it.
Yes.
So I had a very fascinating experience with the world's top consultancy, and I don't want to mention names. And they were talking to me, and they were asking me what we are doing in transformation. And they said, oh, but Vahid, what we realize is when we go and talk to them, they're not as receptive as the way you describe you talking to your people. I said, well, one of the things that I felt when I started this journey was they look at you and say, does that individual understand my pain? Or is it just another whiz kid consultant come along and just say, this is the way to do it, guys, and give them. So you need to get away from that.
Yeah.
And they feel that you are traveling the journey with them, not just dictating it to it. So that's where we got the how bit worked out. So we sat with every individual leader within our business and worked out how we could transform their processes and the way they did things to actually get them to become more efficient and more sustainable in the future, where the coal-fired power stations, or the need for it, diminishes very rapidly.
Right. And do you think that organizations struggle with the how part because a clear why isn't defined, or what?
I think they're all connected. I think you've touched on a very interesting point. The why, the what, and the how are very connected, right? And unless you get that story correct and actually in a way that you can convey it, not simplistically, but simply. So there is a distinction. You can't make it simplistic because it isn't simplistic.
Yeah.
It's very complex, but you need to transfer that information in a simple way so people get, oh, I get it. And then they want to be part of it. They want to be part of the solution with you.
Yes.
And we found an enormous excitement. Certain individuals, which we initially thought they're not going to actually be part of our journey, they were all in. They wanted to be part of it. They want to contribute. They had lots of great ideas on the how, and because they understood the why and the what very easily. So the how, they were participants.
Yes. And I think, an organization needs to spend time on the why. I don't think that you can, develop a why. Why are we doing this? Why does this organization exist? What is our purpose? I don't think that's not a short-term thing. That is an in and through everything. And I think, it takes time to be able to communicate that. And as you were saying, to be able to communicate it simply so that it's consumable, so that the people that you're communicating this with, they can clearly or easily grab onto it, grasp 100%. Onto it. And being able to hear it daily or repeat it weekly, and for it to just be ingrained in their thinking 100%. So that when they have a hard day, when they have a rough day doing the day-to-day tasks, and they start to question, why am I doing this? What's the point of this? What's the purpose? They think back to the why, the big picture. This is why we do what we do.
100%. You're spot on. I couldn't say it better than that. Fantastic.
And so what do you think, what are the biggest challenges an organization faces when embarking on their BPM journey?
The biggest challenge is basically the mindsets. So, you're dealing in our industry specifically, I'm sure, say, if you go to IT industry, it will be different. In our industry, you're dealing with individuals who've been walking into the same workshop for 4 decades. For over 40 years, they've been doing the same routine. And suddenly you want them to come and be part of this process building exercise for the future. And they say, why do I need to do this?
Right.
And so that's a big challenge, the mindsets. And our tack on it was, so we had the older generation, which are the incentivization of older generation, of course, is much harder. But the way we connected the older generation to the young generation was, I said, that's your legacy. But the legacy you leave behind is a sustainable business for the younger generation.
Yes, right.
And suddenly, not all of them, but a lot of them understood that, and they wanted to be part of it, which is fantastic. So mindset was the biggest challenge.
Yes, right. That's great. And for an organization that, they're looking, they've, particularly the executive level, when they're looking at BPM, they want to know, well, what's the value? Where is the return on investment? What is that going to mean for my organization? If 100%. I put X amount of dollars in, what's it going to return to me in either time or cost savings or revenue generated? Do you have any examples of some wins that an organization has experienced because they have invested into BPM?
Sure. So before we go into that, I just want to sort of specify something very important. And that needs to be there before you actually do anything else. And that's trust.
Right.
So, for example, when I went to my business and said, this is my idea, they trusted me. Now, I know that if somebody else had gone in and didn't have the same background as me, the trust probably would not have been there, and the business would have said, no, I may need to get a consultant to do this. So the trust was instrumental. So they need to feel that, okay, I'm going to give this individual 12 months minimum to start getting some traction and show me data that, as you said, has an impact on my bottom line. So we established trust, and on top of trust, we started building consensus. So we went from trust to engaging our individual leaders at the coalface that this is why we want to do this, and built up enough critical mass that then the data part started happening. So talking about what the question you asked, which is how do we connect that to the bottom line? We picked up very specific initiatives, which were in a way low-hanging fruit. So we didn't go for, very aspirational stuff. We went to the low-hanging fruit, the stuff that we knew we had enough leverage to show a business outcome fairly quickly. In our case, we took a couple of very interesting initiatives. One of them was productivity, the other one was safety. And in both cases, within 6 to 9 months, we saw very tangible business outcome. And we
Right.
showed it with business with real data, which that was verified by external auditors as well, that this wasn't just somebody who built up the data for their own advantage. So it was well audited. So the credibility was bulletproof. And then the business said, okay, so we can build on that.
Yes,
And then
right,
we went
right.
to the next initiatives.
Yes, yeah, that's great. And I have heard stories of that where, you know, the BPM has started very small. It started on a project level. It started in a business unit. And then as value was delivered to the organization through that, the executive team takes notice and then they say, let's put it enterprise wide. It's delivering value there. We need this across the organization. So I think,
exactly.
you know, it's important to, you know, to prove that value. But for someone that's listening, that, you know, you talked about trust and how important that is that a time thing, or is that something that can be fast tracked or developed? Let's just say there's someone in an organization that, you know, they're learning about BPM. They can see a huge potential or opportunity in their organization,
Sure.
but maybe they're new there, or
It takes courage. So it takes a lot of courage, because in my case, and I'll be very frank, what I did, I said to the business, if this process I'm doing does not deliver a business outcome within 6 months, sack me.
Okay.
So I put that on the table, and I said, I have such a belief in what I'm trying to do that I know I'm going to deliver an outcome. So it takes a lot of courage. Takes especially if you're new to the organization or in the industry, which I was in a way, and then go with that level of confidence and believe in yourself and what you're doing, and just see how they respond to it. In my case, was positive, and we benefited.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that, you know, BPM, it not only brings together, I guess, that cross-functional view, like how are we delivering value across all different areas of the business? It also links that, I guess, that bottom layer of the day-to-day tasks that are getting done to the strategy, or it can provide that connection, that link. And I think it's very important for that to happen. If there is a disconnection between the processes and the strategy, then the executive team aren't going to,
100%.
they're going to question the value.
Absolutely.
How do you make that link happen?
So again, it's that why piece. So your why piece not only has to mean something to the levels below you, it must mean to the levels above you. So that's where you address that linkage between the business strategy and what you're doing.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. And talking about buy-in, because obviously we've been talking about getting that sponsorship from the executive level, and, you know, starting small and proving value, getting those smaller wins. How do you get buy-in from the process practitioners, the ones who, you know, as you were saying, they've been doing the task or the job for the subject matter experts. They've been doing the same thing day in and day out for the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And you're coming along wanting to improve that, but sometimes there can be resistance there.
It is,
for
100%.
a number of different reasons. So how do you approach that? How do you manage that?
So again, building trust and communication channels. So in our case, we have a very small team, and we mandated that we sit with our individual leaders every week without exception and talk to them what we're doing and how we will help them deliver results.
Yes.
So it's not us expecting them to do something.
Right.
We are saying that in this relationship, I'm part of your solution to your problem. So I'm going to help you all along the way until you get the outcome you desire. And that was on a weekly basis. The discipline that my team had to impress upon this process, that weekly check-in with every individual leader in the business, was paramount.
Right. And so does that include like empowering them to identify
100%.
what other,
100%. Yeah. As I said, at the end of the day, it's their project. It's not my project. It's their project. I am the one who helps them achieve the outcome they need.
Yes.
So they feel such an ownership of the project. It's their project.
Yes.
We will never call it our project.
Yes.
We are just a governance piece to help them achieve that outcome.
Yes, yes. And I think that ownership is so key. It's so important because I think, if there isn't that intentional process ownership there, everyone's just going to pass it like
100%.
it's not mine, it's not for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's historically what I've seen in not only our industry, but many other industries, right? You're waiting for somebody else to come and give you a solution rather than be part of that solution yourself.
That's great. Now, when we spoke last year, we caught up and had a conversation. And one of the things that stood out to me, where you were saying that you've got this motto that you don't expect challenge, you demand challenge. And
Indeed.
I'd love to explore that, dive into that. And what does
Sure.
that, flesh that out a bit?
So I came across this purely out of my own personal journey in life. And I realized it works not only in your professional life, but also in your personal life, where none of us are above being challenged. No one should be above being challenged. None of us have all the answers. So it's through the diversity of thinking that you create a better future, better team.
Yes, right.
And the notional hierarchical organization is based on the fact that just because I have a title head of and I sit at the head of the table, everyone looks at me for answers.
Right.
I said, no. So and I'm paraphrasing one of my favorite individuals who has mentored me in many ways. He said, Vahid, when I go and sit at a table and I call my team, I tell them without any shadow of a doubt, if you come up with the same ideas as I do, one of us is redundant and it's not me.
Yes.
So that notion that we have to come up with different thinking and enrich this thinking pool where a better outcome, a holistic better outcome can emerge. That's the notion. And that's where getting this thinking that everybody needs to be comfortable in challenging one another and just don't be a passenger. Actually say, no, you're wrong. In my view, blah, blah, blah. And that's how you enrich the conversation.
Yeah, and I would imagine that is quite a rare culture. I would say I've definitely, I've definitely spoken to different people where they have that culture in their organization where it doesn't matter what level you're sitting at or which seat at the table you're sitting at, that the atmosphere or the culture's there to bring forth your ideas and your suggestions and your opinions. And I think that sort of culture needs to be intentional. It's not just going to happen. It needs to be cultivated.
It's not intuitive. That's the thing, Daniel. It's not intuitive. We are wired so that we sit in around this table and we say that's a boss. So I just accept anything the boss says. Whereas the modern organizations should be challenging that notion. Boss is just a figurehead. It's still part of the team, and it's a constituent of this team where everyone participates, everyone puts in their ideas into the pool, and what emerges out of the pool is a better thinking.
Yes, definitely. I think, when we combine all of our different ideas and thoughts together, that's where, that's where ideas come from that no single person would be able to come up with.
100%. And in my little team, I believe we've been very successful in that way, and we continuously challenge each other, which is, I love it, really enjoy it.
That's great. And now looking over the last year that we have been through, it's been a very turbulent year and it has forced organizations to adapt and to change. And there have been some organizations that have gone from everyone working in a big office tower in the middle of a city one day to all spread out across the country, working in various home offices and places like that the very next day. And just that I guess monumental shift that's taken place, that in itself has required organizations to be quick to make decisions, quick to act, quick to think through what are the ramifications of our decision making and how are we going to mitigate any risks. And some organizations have been better set up for that than others.
Sure.
But how has BPM played a role in the last year that we have been through?
So, in in my case, where we started, of course, before COVID. So
Mm-hmm.
we started about 9 months before COVID occurred.
Right.
As a consequence of that, we were kind of prepared.
Right.
So it became so successful what we managed to achieve, where I am applying my process, that the other parts of the business are trying to come and learn from us and replicate what we're doing.
Yes.
So as I said, purely was, in our case, was pure luck.
Mm.
We started way before COVID was even on the horizon. We put all the communications in place. The why was well established. The what was well established. The how was being worked out with the people in the field. And for us was a lot better than what I've seen in our competitors and where they are sort of on that curve. So yeah, that's what we did.
Yeah, so beginning 9 months early, obviously, no one knew
Yeah,
what we
it
were
was
about
luck.
to
Yeah, exactly.
face. And so, but I'd imagine for you guys, it was being proactive. It was about getting ready for the future, not necessarily for a pandemic, but to set
Indeed.
up a sustainable, robust organization that that is going to be one of the major players or the main players in the sector in the future.
I mean, in our case, Daniel, what was in terms of projection of electricity generation, we knew there was an equivalent to one major power station being introduced into the electricity grid every year in terms of renewables,
Right.
equivalent to one major coal-fired power station being introduced. So we knew that projection was going to be sustained. So that was the major disruptions we were getting ourselves ready for.
Yes.
And when pandemic hit, it was just another major disruption to what we had envisaged before.
Yes. And I guess for those organizations that were hit hard and maybe they weren't prepared, and now they're that they had to learn to adapt on the fly, and some organizations have fared better than others.
Indeed.
How important is BPM now moving into the future?
Even more so, as I said, but it's more how we deliver BPM, right? Because I think the notion of BPM being necessary is unquestioned.
Right.
It's the how piece that, and I refer to what I've kept saying during this interview, and make sure your people are part of that process.
Yes.
Do not come and say and dictate and prescribe the process, but bring people as part of the design of the process. And then your success is not necessarily guaranteed, but has a far higher chance of success than otherwise.
Yes. And for someone listening to this right now that maybe this is the first time they've really started exploring BPM and what does that mean for an organization? What does that mean for my organization? And they're learning about the topic of BPM, but when they, I guess one of the main goals of this podcast series is to spark conversation, to get people questioning the way they're running their organization, and to think about different ways they can improve the organization through their business processes. But what are some of the objections that someone might face if they approach their executive team or the senior leadership team saying, hey guys, we need to adopt this if we want to be effective or progress into the future?
Well, I mean, I tell you exactly what the objections that I saw, especially in the early part, and the objection is, what's in it for me? So show me the benefit, right? And in the early part, of course, you can't show the benefit. You are building on a hypothesis. And again, that's why I talked about trust. So those objections are real. And then when you start delivering the data, then they say, how do I believe this data? Well, because it's very easy to make up data. People in the data world, they know you can make data look anything you like.
Right.
So and task. So in our case, we made sure that we not only got our data internally audited, but also externally audited. So the objections diminished when that level of credibility was attached to the data in terms of return on investment.
That's great. That's good. And when we're looking at the future now and moving into the future over the next 2, 3, 5 years, and every organization, they're at a different maturity level when it comes
Sure.
to the way they manage their business processes. But, some have started exploring robotic process automation, process mining, these different technologies. Other organizations are yet to have any form of documentation of their processes. They don't even understand their baseline or where they're starting from. But what do you see taking place over the next 2, 3, 5 years? And where do you feel like organizations need to be investing their time when it comes to BPM?
That's a tough question, really tough question, because predicting future is it's crazy. None of us will be able to predict what's going to happen. For me, is building on solid foundation of delivering business outcome and forever checking the outcome and checking the results and verifying the results and build on what you learn along that journey. Right. That's all I can say we can do, because the rest of it, trying to predict the disruptions and how they're going to change the landscape, is extremely hard, right? I mean, COVID was the best example of that, where the whole view of our world changed, right? And there's nothing to say that we're not going to have something even more severe than that happening in the near future. But if you have a well established, trust driven little team, not a big team, it has to be a little team that people can relate to. Individuals have personalities. People can say, oh, that's John, or that's Rachel. I can connect with that individual. Then build upon those relationships and build on data that is meaningful, and it's not complex. It's simple in terms of how it shows the business outcome that the business needs. Then you have a chance of managing whatever comes in the future. I think that gives you the best chance, the way I see it, as possible.
Yeah. And as you were saying, I think checking the results and the KPIs, your indicators, how are we doing? How are we performing? Because I think that's key when making changes or improvements moving. You want to be, you want it to be a living, breathing thing. You want to be able to adapt with what the future throws at you. And because the business landscape these days, it's changing so
very
rapidly.
Unpredictable.
You don't want to put something in place for 2, 3 years, get to the end of that and realize you're well behind.
But I'm glad you brought the term KPI, because we differentiate two types of KPIs for our process. One is lagging KPI, which basically you can't do anything about. Whatever's happened is happened, and all you're seeing is the outcome, and there's nothing you can change to change the outcome of that KPI.
Right.
The thing that's for us far more important from lagging KPI is the leading KPI. Those telltales that give you a chance of, if I keep on this track, it's going to get me either in a good place or a bad place. The leading KPIs are far more important, because that's something you can actually do something about right now. You can actually influence the upcoming events. You have a chance of doing it. Whereas lagging KPIs are historical data. It's gone. It's in the bag, whatever it is, positive or negative. So for us is the leading KPIs, and leading KPIs are actually world. I don't know how much you've delved into leading KPIs to determine. It doesn't matter whatever initiative you're looking at and the process that drives that initiative, to determine what are the leading KPIs. Is a very complex world, and it's extremely subjective. And you need to bring in your leaders along with you, so that when you hold them account to that leading KPI, they feel an ownership of that leading KPI.
Right.
So it becomes very critical.
Yes, that's great. And for someone that's listening to this conversation, where they're learning about BPM for the first time, or they're continuing their understanding or their exploration on the topic, where would you encourage them to go to learn more? Because obviously the internet can be quite overwhelming, and there's a lot of different reports and a lot of different thoughts and opinions out there, but not necessarily, well, what is right for my organization at this time, and what are the foundations I need to get in place before I even start considering that? So where would you encourage someone to go?
So I can only suggest what I did, and we started with McKinsey. They're the preeminent consultancy in the world. They probably have got more publications on transformation and processes than anybody else. And if you tap into their data bank, there's a monumental amount of stuff that you can learn about how you set up processes and the stuff that you need to tick before you go to the next level.
Right.
And that's what we did. And then we started to morph it to suit our business. So it's no point just taking a textbook approach and just say it's going to be applicable to your business. You need to actually adapt it to your business, and that takes a lot of time.
Yep, that's right. I think it is important for people to be aware of their organization and what are what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, where are our strong areas, what are our weak areas, what is our culture, what is our company culture? Is it a culture of a vulnerable, transparent culture that fosters ideas and thoughts and opinions and challenges?
To that point, for example, if you're a startup, you already have a dynamic culture. You have a very versatile, proactive culture, because you have to be a startup. Whereas, but if you're in terms of your project, your business life cycle, you're in the maturity stage, it's much harder. Your culture is well established. People don't like to change. The adaptability is far less. So where you are in your life cycle is critical, and you need to understand that. Nobody knows it better than you do as your own business, as a business owner, a part of that business. So establish where you are and address your process design based on where you are.
Yes. Yep. And then looking towards what are our goals? What is the future that we want to create? Are we going to play by other people's rules, or are we going to innovate and create the future that other people will have to play to?
Sure. Absolutely. Without question.
That's great. Well, Vahid, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me today. I think that even though in 40 minutes, we can only really scrape the surface on what there is to sort of delve into when it comes to digital transformation or business transformation and business process management. But I think that the goal of this podcast is to challenge people's thinking and mindsets, and just to give them one piece of information that they can go back and start a conversation within their organization, because I think that's where it starts. If you're a lone ranger in an organization, you're going to have a lot of a hard time. And
tough time.
If you're not in a position where you can start pitching or presenting to the executive level, is there someone else that has a similar process-centric way of looking at things? Can you start conversations there? Can you I don't know, foster something on a very small level where you can share ideas and start to work towards, how can BPM bring value to our organization, and where can we start, even if it's on a micro level?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I just want
to. I mean, for me is sharing, right? And that's what I'm doing. That's why I like what you're doing. I believe sharing this information with people and allowing these conversations to occur is only going to enrich all of us.
And so, on behalf of the Process Pioneers community, I want to thank you for sitting down with us, because I've been taking a lot of notes and learning a lot, and I'm sure the audience will as well. So it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks very much.